Living in the big city has its advantages. You have everything at your fingertips. But for most people, the simple life of a small town gives them everything that they need. Escalante, Utah, which is located in the middle of the Escalante Grand National Staircase, does just that. It gives people beautiful scenery and the simple life that most of us will not be able to experience. In 1875, geologist J.W. Powell led a group of men up the Escalante River in order to survey the area. They set up camp on the top of the plateau above where the town now sits. The next day, geologist A.V. Thompson wrote about what he saw.
Came from camp on Last Chance to camp on Pine Creek about a mile above its junction with Escalante. I saw 4 Mormons from Panguitch who were talking about making a settlement here. I advised them to call the place Escalante. A.V. Thompson Journal, 1985.
Throughout the years, Escalante had become a settlement. Many of the new townspeople had come from Panguitch. The first holiday that was celebrated in the new settlement was the 4th of July, which happened to be America's 100th birthday. After the turn of the 19th century, the city of Escalante was a full working town. The cattle industry was their main source of income, with 800 head per rancher. During the summer months, school was out, and the able-bodied men and boys usually worked with the ranchers to get the cattle ready to send throughout the world. They didn't have cars in those days, so most of the transportation was done by horse and wagon. In 1902, the first church house was built, which also served as city hall and a public gathering place.
As you entered the building, right near the door, there were steps that led to the basement classrooms. Over the steps was a canopy. At least the steps were enclosed. As there were no coat or hat racks, the men always put their hats on top of the canopy. I'm sure in those days no man ever thought of going to church without a hat. Last of the things that I remember was the old pot-belly stove which set into the middle of the building. As you entered the building, you warmed by the stove. Our front sides roasted and your back side froze. Netta Shirts, 1977 church sermon.
In 1929, the Wall Street market crashed and sent the United States into the Great Depression.
The Great Depression didn't affect Escalante like it did a lot of towns. We had no soup lines, no bread lines. And the reason for it is because everybody grew a garden. Everybody had some livestock. And nobody said anything if you went out and killed a deer out of season. It was just acceptable because everybody needed food.
Escalante was a close-knit community. Nobody ever went hungry. Everyone helped everyone else because everyone was poor in the city, so they were self-sufficient in order to live.
Mother always said that, she said, I always knew where my next meal was coming from. But she says, I know of a lot of people that didn't have any idea where their next meal was coming from. There was just a lot of people that was damn poor, but everybody shared. Everybody shared what they had. And you'd see people packing food back and forth in town here, and everybody had to walk. See, either walk or ride a horse or go in a wagon. But you'd see these women going back and forth with a little dish towel over some stuff that they was taking to their sisters or brothers or somebody and their kids to eat. Everybody just shared.
With the start of the war, young men aged 18 to 25 set off. 25 men served in World War I. Out of that 25, 5 did not make it home. Also, 2 out of the 25 men were prisoners of war.
In 1944, I was on my way to take German prisoners to our camp. While driving, we found ourselves surrounded by German soldiers. They took us to Limburg, where I stayed for about 3 weeks. I was then taken to Nuremberg, where we were given one small blanket in the middle of winter. In January of 1945, we were lined up when we heard gunshots. The Germans took us out of the camp and walked us across the river where the Russians did a surprise attack. The Russians took us to their camp and told us that they were going into Berlin, so go the opposite way. We grabbed a ride with Russian soldiers to the harbor of Odessa, where we boarded a British ship. We landed in Naples, Italy, where the rest of the American prisoners were put onto an American ship and we headed home. We finally got to New York 5 days later, and while pulling into the harbor, I looked up and saw the Statue of Liberty. Feelings of pride welled up in me, and finally I saw something beautiful after seeing nothing but war-ravaged countrysides. It was good to be home. Hiram Coleman, Town Social, 1956.
Between World War I and the Korean War, Escalante suffered even more because each one of those wars took young men from the town. This was a problem because the young men that went off to war got to see the world. So when the war was over, 80% of them did not come home, mainly because there was no employment.
And see, after the war, I never came back either because my dad had cattle and I wanted him to sell them to me, and I wanted to come back and run the cattle and try to make a living, and he said he wouldn't sell them to me. And I was a little bit upset that he wouldn't, but he said, if I sell you these cattle, in 20 years you won't have any cattle because the public domain cuts you back so many every year.
Arnold Alvey recalls how his father taught him about big city traffic before he left.
Hell, when I got ready to go to the Army, my dad set a post out there in the trail and tied me up to it and run a wheelbarrow around me for 2 weeks to get me used to traffic.
Today, Escalante has changed from their main income being cattle to it now being tourism. Being a town right in the middle of the Escalante Grand National Staircase, with Calf Creek Falls and the Hole in the Rock being right at your fingertips, it makes sense. Escalante is truly a one-of-a-kind place that has thrived through the centuries and will continue to thrive for centuries to come.